Mike check. What's going on, people? How's it going? How's it going? You see me today. Got on my throwback Hillman shirt with the support HBCUs. You know, it's the Sundays. We always got that Sunday elevation talk. So we gonna set the scene real quick. Some things I've been reading, some things that I've been exploring, some ideas. Always trying to figure out how we can propel our people forward, move our community up to higher heights, and first we have to set the foundation, right? So it's all these talks about, well, what's going on in our community, why are certain things happening, what's going on with the kids, with the youth, with the adults, black men, black women. And we get into these tiffs and these arguments because a lot of times we're putting a lot of focus on trying to point the finger at this one thing or this other thing, and people are arguing um about their opinions, going back and forth. So I'm going to kind of create and set the foundation and try to be all inclusive of a lot of what's going on, because there is a intricate web that has been woven in this community when we talk about our issues. So I got this from out of Brainwashed. It was a great concise paragraph of what the problems have been. And so it states this: a perfect storm of factors has scuttled African American student achievement. So we're gonna focus on students real quick, or we're gonna focus on our youth, which also moves us into adulthood, right? Because as adults, we are who we are because of what we learned at those ages in our adolescence. And some things were good and some things weren't. So you had to actively remove some of those bad habits and remove some of those lessons that we ended up internalizing. So a perfect storm of factors has scuttled African American student achievement. Economic isolation of the poor in high crime neighborhoods, resegregation that recreated all black, under resourced schools, concentration of the system's worst and most overworked teachers in these learning institutions, the waning of the nation's industrial economy, the erosion of the Black extended family and value system, the deadly drug trade, gun proliferation, and most damaging, media that celebrates violence, materialism, and underachievement. So, you know, where do we start? In the heydays, we always got to go back. I always like to connect the history and bring it up to present day. In our communities, what are our value systems that we are instilling in our people? You know, what where did we fall off at is a place that I would like to go. Where do we fall off at from having those communities that were thriving, having those schools with some of the best and brightest teachers of our community, having schools that focused on a curriculum that was based on African centered thought, right? When they came out of enslavement during Reconstruction, our people were at a thirst for knowledge, and they understood that the liberation for our society would have to come through education. And those values were placed on our people, either creating organizations that focused on civil rights, liberation, and education, that focused on actual educational institutions. Shout out our HBCUs, which were started by members of our community taking their own hands and brick by brick building these schoolhouses that have now morphed and evolved into these campuses across the community. And then the refinement of individuals in our community who had a yearning to teach people how to read and write, but most of all, teach people how to think critically, but then to become producers and not consumers of information. Those who were doing research to figure out, how do we break the chains of the psychological enslavement post the actual physical enslavement. And so there was a lot of intentionality that went into our communities, that went into the individuals in our community, in this active learning instead of this passive learning, right? And also, when we were trying to break off, or when we were trying to escape the characteristics of being inferior. We understood that we weren't inferior. So we would try to do everything that was the antithesis to what inferior behaviors were modeled after. So whether that went to the way that we dress, trying to be look dignified and be dignified, or the way that we spoke, even having our institutions to be of a particular caliber in telling our children and telling our community, and just having this cohesion of thought that we were going to bring our best and do our best, right? And this wasn't it wasn't always totally across the board. Of course, there were parts of our community that faltered and that did not actually measure up. However, we have to focus on what was good in our society, because we have went so far off the track now, that some of the things that we are doing are specious. Some of the things that we are doing, they lack substance. We are not being intentional about grasping our education for the liberation of our people, for the improvement of the communities from which we have come from. And we aren't focusing on that information outside of just benefiting our own selves. And I believe that what we are going to need to do is to teach our people and to teach our children the value systems of why gaining knowledge is important, why focusing on culture is important, why creating and being men and women of high morals and high values are important. Because what we've been doing for these past, ever since integration, I guess, occurred, or let's we talk about the 70s and stuff, ever since all of that has happened, we have been underperforming as a people. We're great when it comes to communities wanting to take our style, take our swag. They want to know what's the latest on, what's the the best shoes to wear, clothes, driving a fancy car, all of this stuff that is just empty. It's just empty calories for the nourishment of our minds and for the nourishment of our bodies. And so we need to become the leading people in the areas of engineering, the STEM programs, as well as knowing what our culture represents and how we want to represent that culture across the board. But this is going to take a conglomerate of our best, those people who really want to focus their minds and their levels of intelligence in our community. Are we sitting around at the table and really taking our time to learn in our history what methods were best working for us? And we don't have to be so separatist. We don't have to cast aside the Nation of Islam. We don't have to cast aside the teachings of Pan-Africanism, right? We can take these worlds, figure out what the best of it was, and we can make these improvements. And I tell people all the time, that was the point of history. History was not supposed to be for us to just go back, read facts, and freeze situations in those moments, right? History was so we can learn where these people left off at. History was so we can see when they encountered certain issues in our community, what was the best methodology that was put in place to counteract what was happening to us. How successful was a boycott, or why did they choose a boycott? The economic support. How best did we leverage a response when we hit people and companies in their pockets? What is the best tools that we can use to leverage the community, our representatives, to have to hear our voices, so you learn what those tactics were? What did Malcolm X do that was so phenomenal? What did Huey P. Newton do that was working? Harriet Tubman and her resolve. You bring this all the way up to present day. But first, we have to look at history with from a place of research, with the analytical mindset. And I think that we fail and we miss those moments and those opportunities. We miss the education of that when we don't approach our history with really trying to learn, we're really trying to learn what best practices were put in place. We are in the best situation that we can ever be in at this time and in this moment, because we can take those minds. I've said this before, we can take the minds of our greatest thinkers in our communities, and we can all embody that within ourselves. And most importantly, you watch them create institutions, you watch them create these organizations that are still around today that we're either proud to be a part of, or they are the de facto go-to organization for politicians to have a representative in the community come speak to our people, whether that's, and no matter how you feel about it, what we're talking about is the history of it, the significance of it. And if you don't feel good about it now, my challenge to you is to ask you, what are you doing as far as your ability to either get involved in it and make it better? We what they call it, we are couch quarterbacks when it comes to talking about what's right and what's wrong in our community. But none of us are some of us, I'm not gonna say no, I'm sorry. Some of us are not actually getting on the field, getting in the industry, and then trying to make those improvements and to make those things better. There's an evolution that has to occur in thought, of course. Of course there is. But when our community is at its biggest threat because we do not create our own things, we don't create our own basic necessities, the most simplest things. We don't create our own damn underwear and drawers, something you gotta wear, socks. Where's the warehouses at in the hood that's creating these particular products? And if some exist, cool, but not enough of them exist. We're not making the bare necessities. Our public school institutions that are within the hood, first of all, public schools came from us. We created public schools after Reconstruction because we understood the value of education. And we wanted all, whether you were rich, poor, underserved, under-resourced, we wanted everyone to have an opportunity to be able to get a basic education. But we here taking education for granted, acting like that's you when a kid is smart, we still in this day in 2022 are saying you acting white. Like, just tell me you don't know about the history. Tell me you don't know about what we created. Tell me you don't know our involvement in science and inventions without telling me you don't. Based off of the asinine comments and stuff like that. Our inferior thought has to go. It has to be eradicated. And that's the thing, that power, that ability, those are things within our control. We focus so much on these things that are not within our control, and we give so much power, we give so much of our power away to these things that's not in our control. But you dictate what you put in your mouth. You dictate what you put in your mind. You control what you see on a daily basis. You control the narratives that you take in simply by the actions of what you do with your hands. You make conscious and unconscious decisions to constantly fill your mind and your brain with negativity. And then over time, that negativity becomes who you are. I don't care how much you say you try to get away from it. I can turn my brain, I can turn my mind off. No, there's such thing as the subconscious, and the subconscious is who you are, and that can be your default behavior. So we focus so much, and that's why I say let's give 50% of the reason why we are in our condition can be because of racism, can be because of systemic racism, can be because of gaps in gaps in education or finances and let's just say that those are some of society's things that are being inflicted on us, and I will give you 50%. But my challenge and my question to you is, what the hell are we going to do with the other 50% of things that are within our control? All of that stuff that I just talked about. When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing that you do? Do you exercise? Do you jog in place? What do you eat breakfast? What are you consuming at breakfast? Do you meditate? When you do you tell people what's your gratitude? What are you grateful for? Are you, if you're trying to get a job, are you trying to build up your skill set? Are you adding new skills to what you need? Are you drinking water? What's the first? Are you reading your holy text? You're reading a passage out your holy text. What do you do when you first wake up? And then what do you do throughout the day to sustain yourself? And at the end of the day, how do you reflect? What do you look at your to-do list and say, these are things I still need to get done? If you're setting goals, objectives, what is your plan to get towards that? All that's all the 50% of things that are within our control. What new word did you learn today? What new person did you learn today about in your ethnic background? See, we don't want to talk about all of that. We don't want to hold ourselves accountable and hit ourselves on the hands when we don't do that type of stuff. But we want to go out and blame everybody else and just say, I'm trying. Well, what does your trying look like? Is your trying measurable? Like, these are things to consider. And the minute that you answer, I'm doing everything, then you automatically know that you're the problem. You're a problem right then and there. You're not doing everything that you can. And if you are doing everything that you can, maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and you need to rework and rewrite what it is that you're doing, because you're not getting the necessary outcome that you want to get. To be angry, to be bitter, to be hateful, to see all of that becomes a choice. But that choice is created over time based off of the narratives and the imagery that you're taking in. So we have to be responsible about that type of stuff. In our culture as African Americans, if you don't know about Pan-Africanism, if you don't know, and I'm just talking about a working knowledge, I'm talking about being able to possibly mention, some of the theories and thought from some of our best activists. W.E.B. Du Bois, what did he say? What was his philosophy? What was the problem of the color line? What was the United Negro Improvement Association? What was their motto? What was Noble Drew Ali talking about with the Moorish Science Temple in the Circle 7 Quran? What do the 5%ers, the Nation of the Gods and Earth, what is some of their philosophy? What Prince Hall Freemasonry? What was the womanist movement? What was the Black feminism movement? Our HBCUs, how many HBCUs do we have? What are some of these HBCUs known for? Which one of them has an aviation program? Which one of them has the best engineering program, the best pharmacy program? There are just these ideas, or I'm sorry, there are these ideas, and there are people. If they're in our background, in our ethnic background, we should have a working knowledge about this stuff. Not say, damn, I ain't never looked into that. I never heard about that. I don't necessarily know. Because what happens is that now other people are able to dictate the narratives for you based off what they want you to know about certain movements. The Black Panther Party. How many Black Panther parties were there actually? And no, I'm not talking about the new Black Panther Party. I'm talking about back then when there was the Black Panther Party with Huey P. Newton. What was going on in Alabama when it came to voting? Like when it came to creating a political action committee. What What does our Congressional Black Caucus do? Who is our Congressional Black Caucus made up? What are the objectives of the Congressional Black Caucus? What are some of the legislation that they're looking at passing? Like there are all of these questions that exist in our community that we, just from a cultural paradigm, we should already be able to know, talk about, and teach our kids. And it's not saying that you agree with any of them. You should be able to agree with something out of each one of them, by the way. But it's saying you're teaching because you're trying to work and figure out how to build on those philosophies. The Harlem Renaissance. So the Harlem Renaissance was never supposed to end. The Harlem Renaissance was supposed to be a continuation, and there should still be a Renaissance going on today. Also know that the Harlem Renaissance wasn't just confined to the boundaries of Harlem. Because when you start to study the people in the Harlem Renaissance, you'll see they was over in Chicago, they was in Detroit, they was in Indiana, they was in Ohio, they was in DC. So it was a collection. The Harlem Renaissance was over in Paris. Like all of those people during that era, these are all the different places that they lived at. So it was talking about the influence and talents of African Americans across the diaspora, and they just use Harlem as just one of those. That was the Mecca, that was the central area, probably, where those people came, where they went, and where they exposed themselves and exposed their talents. So all this, all of that I just talked about, since we gave the 50% to the racism and the whites and the people putting their foot on our necks and the police brutality and all of that, we gave that 50% to that. We acknowledge that. We say that it's real. But there's another side to that, and that's the 50% of everything that's in our control and the 50% of all that we are not doing. And we need to start having some real conversations and some real action behind it, right? Because they panel to death. They panel to death, and there is no solution out of it. And everybody's just spewing their own opinions. But what is the work part of it on the back end of that? People have been having panels since before, whenever, 60s, 50s, 40s, whatever. There's been panels, right? But now we have to look at it, since all of these panels, Malcolm X said on the panel, Martin King said on the panel, Honorable Elijah Muhammad said on the panel, like all Khalid Muhammad said on the panel, Walter Williams said on the panel. We done had the best minds on several different panels. But now those people are not around, and look at the condition of our community. Because none of this matters if you're not getting in a room and if you're not impacting and affecting people and pushing people to a particular set of actions. So that's my charge, that's my challenge to the community. Our organizations were full of people as a way to bring our minds together, so that now two heads are better than one. But then a pair of hands, multiple pairs of hands are better than just one pair of hands. And so we were all supposed to be moving together and working and utilizing whatever our respective talents were. You good at drawing, you good at marketing, you're good at speaking, you're good at writing, you're good at carpentry, you're good at this. All of those different people's talents were supposed to come together collectively and be utilized in our community to help lift up our community. In some kind of way, we have missed that. We have gotten past that. We're in these things now to say that we're in these things, but there is no improvement in the community coming out of these things. Not enough. Not for the numbers that exist in these organizations. There's not enough. What are our colleges? How well, I say that they're not, how well are our institutions focusing on Black thought, on African thought and history, in these areas like business, in these areas of political science, in these areas of mathematics, in these areas of nursing, the medical field? How much are how much are we reading the text from the minds of other African Americans and then focusing on those communities that plague our African American communities respectively, and then how are those improvements being made? And if we're not having those conversations, right, if we're not coming from that perspective, then we are failing to focus the lens on our community and come up with strategies and measurable outcomes. And so we need to go back to our Detroits. We need to go back to our parts of Miami, to our Liberty cities, our Baltimore's. There's no reason that Chicago should be dealing with the level of violence that it's dealing with in this day and age. Not with all of these able-bodied people, but the reason why is because the psychology is our psychology is in deep, desperate conflicts and is being exploited to perpetuate negative attitudes and outcomes for those people. And we got kids involved. We got the youth involved. And we're valuing the wrong things. Where's the knowledge valued at? Because knowledge gets you up out of your condition. Everything that you do, every industry that you go into, your trajectory is always tied to the level of knowledge that you possess. Everything. Politics is the manipulation of the knowledge of legislation that those people use against those who aren't aware, but for a lack of knowledge. So how come knowledge, wisdom, and understanding is not being more impressed upon our people and not more valued? Being dumb, being unintelligent, being unaware doesn't get you anywhere, but wrapped up in a system that other people get to use to make money off of you, to exploit you for labor. And we value that? We think that's dope? What are we doing here? How are we allowing other people, other communities to use us to invoke poison in our community? We drink up all of the poison. We smoke up all of the poison. We shoot up all of the poison. And we look at that as badges of honor or things that should be respected. Like, just really sit back, look around, and look at what's going on in our communities. But some of these individuals are some of the smartest people if they apply the science, if they apply the mathematics, if they apply some type of system of teaching to help you elevate yourself up out of that. We're the biggest consumers in America. Consumers. So what that mean? That means that we have the finances, not that we pour down and out, this and that. We're the biggest consumers in America. Money is just a tool that is used. That tool can be used for positivity or it can be used for negativity. But none of us can say we don't have the tool. The problem is just the usage of the tool that's at fault. There's no way we can cry and claim being poor, but then at the same time be the biggest consumers of products in America. That means we can actually take that money, repurpose it, and now become the biggest producers or investors of something that reap rewards, benefits, and outcomes for us. But it's all in the psychology of how we're looking at it. It's all in the way of when you look around, is your money going towards assets or is your money going towards liabilities? Are you thinking independently about how your dollar works, or are you trying to think collectively about how y'all's dollars can work together? Neighbors, all of that. Like there has to come some honest conversations. And the last thing I'll leave out on this, being poor, coming from a community that's lacking resources, right? I'm talking about financial resources. That is no reason for you to think that you're justifiable in taking a life. I am not going to tolerate or allow anybody to say that killing, murdering is a result of being poor in itself. That's a result of lacking value for yourself first. And then once you lack value and love for yourself, you're able to devalue another human. And at that point, when you're willing to kill and invoke those types of behaviors on a neighborhood where people are collectively supposed to be living together, where the elderly exist, where the children exist, then I no longer can see your humanity. You are a savage at that point. You are savage and uncivilized at that point. But it stems from not just because people are poor. That's a sorry excuse when people are taking people's lives. The problem is that we have begun to value that type of behavior. You can't have knowledge, wisdom, love, peace, and happiness cannot coexist with violence, debauchery, degradation, and ignorance and unintelligence. They can't cohabitate. So that means you have one, that means you don't have the other. And so we need to start to re-identify and recalibrate what we as the Black community, African American community, what it is that we want to represent for ourselves, and not represent for ourselves because we want other people to see the humanity in us, and because we're trying to show other people that we're not inferior. I don't care about no other people. We doing this for us. We doing this to maintain our families. We're doing this to sustain our people. We're doing this to make the improvements and get back to the root of what it is that we have known ourselves to be as phenomenal Black, phenomenal African, phenomenal whatever ethnicity you identify with, but melanated individuals. And my last point is going to be this. We went through 1,400 years, because 1,000, there's a thing called the trans-Saharan slave trade, and there's a thing called the transatlantic slave trade. 1,400 years, let's just give it, of negativity, of being oppressed, of being subjugated, being castrated, being lynched, being enslaved. Understand the thought process and the actions and everything that happened to our community. And the reason why I don't care about that, because that's the 1,400 years. When we go back into history, we can see our people thriving and being leaders in the world for tens of thousands of years of civilization. 1,400 years, and really most of us are really plagued by just the 400 plus years of what happened on this soil in America. Some of the 1,000 years is new information, so I really don't even want to use that. But we got to take this 400 plus years and stop using that as a crutch on our people, and we have to break open the pages and explore the thousands and tens of thousands of years and the different areas of the world in which we were at when we weren't living like savages, when we weren't devaluing ourselves, when we were trying to look at the world, figure out what is my relation to the world and what is my relation to the people in it, and how can I make this better? So don't tell me that 400 years of a situation is now going to dictate how our whole entire community reacts and how we choose to live. No, we're choosing to focus on that, and we're choosing to start the root of our story and the foundation of our story at that space. And then we're allowing our lack of growth to be because of that. When all surrounding that, if you allow 400 years, then to dictate that, then what happens when you open yourself up to 6,000 years of success? That's what I choose to do. And the only time I look at the 400 years is when I'm trying to figure out what went wrong. How do we get ourselves in that situation? What did we start to then value versus what we were valuing before? And how did we get ourselves up out of that situation? Because ain't nobody give us freedom. We fought for that. Shout out the Haitian Revolution. Shout out German Coast Uprising. Shout out Stonewall Rebellion. Shout out Nat Turner. Shout out John Brown. All these different rebellious activities that we engaged in, and we kept fighting and we kept fighting and we kept marching and we kept leaving and we kept running away and we kept freeing other people, and we started abolitionist movement. Shout out Frederick Douglass. Shout out Prince Hall. Shout out Sojourner Truth. Nah, ain't nobody give us nothing. We demanded that. We fought for that. We rebelled until we got that, and they had to get up off of us. So where is that spirit at today? That's innate. That's internal. And that's what we need to understand, because we saw the humanity and dignity in ourselves. That's who we truly are. So who we've been for these past, after the 60s, after the whole integration, and how we've just declined and how we've been becoming beggars of an institution to give us something, yet they were the same institution that took our stuff away. No, we need to start getting back to the re-education of ourselves, start having the pride in our communities to build up our communities, reinvest in our communities. And we need to do that just for self. And it starts by gaining knowledge of self. That's my time. Appreciate y'all. As always, this is another House of our 10. We finna turn the fire up.